Hello again, friends. Welcome back to the Decision Masters podcast. I'm Kirsten Parker, your decision coach for the episode, and we are going to have a conversation today about overwhelm. I'm going to try to keep this as light and digestible as possible. Sounds like a delicious course of a meal that you're not going to walk away really heavy and sleepy from, right? Because listen, if you are overwhelmed right now, I want to give you some things to think about as if we were in a coaching conversation and we were looking at your week ahead and you came to me saying, I'm super overwhelmed and I don't know how I'm going to do this week. So I want to give you 5 really practical things to look at to have less overwhelm this week. And then in future episodes, we're going to talk about how to decrease overwhelm long term. With overwhelm, it needs a two-prong approach, right? My earrings are very swoopy doopy today, so I'm kind of going with it. But we need a two-prong approach. We need to have boots on the ground and address your overwhelm today and tomorrow and the next day so that you have more and more energy and can recover more, have more recovery time so you can be more and more effective in changing your habits or routine or life structure or whatever's going on that's creating overwhelm overall, right? So we need this kind of ground level and high level approach to solving this overwhelm problem. So let's just have a light conversation about it, about your actual week, this week, if this is the week you're experiencing overwhelm. The first thing I want you to do is check for breaks. All right. You're a human person. And I swear the scheduler in me, I was a theater stage manager for over 10 years in my first career. The inner calendar creator in me cringes when I see people's schedules that do not account for travel time, buffer time, break time. We have to put these in our schedules. We are not robot people. And I get that not everyone is completely in charge of what goes on your calendar. You are in charge of your own human person, though. If you need to take a 90-second breathing break in between meetings, nobody can force you not to do that. I defy anyone who wants to argue with me on that. So look for where you might be giving up agency and saying, I don't have any control. Even if you don't put your own meetings on your calendar, even if you're in a position where somebody else tells you where to be, you have to take responsibility for your own person. This is me clutching my human body. So check for breaks. And if you have the ability to manipulate your schedule at all, please, by all means, do so. If you need to work for an hour on something, that better be taken up at least an hour and a half, preferably an hour 45 to 2 hours in your calendar. If you need an hour of work time, because you got to get into that thing, you got to get out of that thing. If you have to travel between offices, physical spaces, mental spaces, meetings, you cannot show up at noon and start working on something immediately if your last thing finished at noon. It's just not how we operate. So just check in the week ahead. Does your calendar make it look like you should be time traveling between one meeting, one instant, and then the next instant being in another meeting, or being in one headspace and then immediately being in another headspace? Do you have time to eat? Does it look like you are a person who's going to have to go to the bathroom or drink a glass of water at some point on this day? Scan for that and put it in your calendar if it needs protecting, if that time needs protecting, or if you need a reminder. If you're like me and sometimes you can just, your physical needs seem to wander away at some point sometimes, and you're like, whoops, it's been 7 hours and I haven't eaten. Put a reminder in your calendar, put lunch break in your calendar. No shame. Some of us need reminding. Okay. I also want you to consider this question that I think is brilliant that I can't take credit for. I heard it on my business coach's podcast, Samantha Siffring. She said, see if you would hand this schedule to anybody else. I think that's a brilliant question because we're all way harder on ourselves than we would ever be to anyone else. So if that helps you, use that lens to look at your schedule through too. Would I create this calendar for someone else to do? Would someone else on my team or, my best friend or whoever? So that's the first thing you're going to scan for to just have less overwhelm off the bat, out the gate this week. Where are the breaks? And you need breaks throughout the day. You don't have to necessarily schedule them all, but I want you to get out of this. Okay, I'm going to take 1 hour off in the middle of the day, and then that's it. The rest of the time, I should be sprinting, never stopping mentality. We want to get out of that. Okay, the second thing I'm going to ask you to look for in your week is if you can batch things energetically. Now, again, you do not have to be able to completely control your schedule in order to use this tactic to decrease overwhelm. But we are task switching a lot in our lives right now. And that means we are going from needing one kind of energy to do something, whether that's doing a bunch of writing or doing a bunch of critical thinking or doing a bunch of speaking and engaging. We are flipping back and forth. We're flipping between all the channels. We're never getting into a groove with a show. So, one thing that can help decrease overwhelm is decrease the amount of and the frequency of task switching. And in this sense, what we're talking about is look at the kind of things that you're putting on your calendar and see if we can group some of them together so you don't have to take such big energetic leaps all day, every day. What this might look like is if you have a bunch of emailing to do or report writing to do or proposals to write, can we put some of that closer together? Can we put that in one chunk on one day or a couple of chunks on a couple of days in a row? We don't want to overdo it. We don't want to swing too far in the other direction and melt your brain because you have 9 straight hours of emails or whatever. But we're looking for how can we save you energy? So this requires a little bit of knowledge of your personal limits. Like, what's your Zoom capacity? What's your sit down and be by yourself and think and write capacity? And can we craft your schedule to be a little more in line with that? So we put 4 hours of Zoom on the calendar instead of 4 random hours spread through your week that you have to switch out of whatever you're doing beforehand and then get into that Zoom mode and then switch out. Okay, the third thing I would like you to check for is if what energizes you has been scheduled. A lot of people after COVID were talking about, oh my gosh, I realized I'm an introvert, or I think that I turned into an introvert over COVID. Ha ha ha. And a lot of that talk was actually referring to their desire to do things in the world, like not go to 4 social engagements in 5 days. But introvert and extrovert, what these terms refer to is how you restore your energy. Do you restore your energy being alone or being with people? Personally, and I am not an expert on this, so take this with a grain of salt, but I think that I fall under the category of very selective extrovert slash naturovert. I know that if I spend too long just working by myself in my apartment, talking to my dogs like I do, I go a little crazy. I need to have human interaction, but not just any human interaction. I am very selective about the people that I want to be around. And I get a little spicy when I'm around people that I do not want to people around. So if you want to be in my camp with me, then join me. I think it's perfectly acceptable. Being very picky extrovert, highly selective extrovert, or naturovert. I don't know if that's a thing. I don't know if we get a term for that, but I also know that if I go too long without just being outside in a beautiful place that is calming to my nervous system, I have very little bandwidth. My nervous system gets activated a lot more easily. So I need to make sure I have nature time. And I want you to look at your plan for your week that's coming up that you really want to experience less overwhelmment. And I want you to scan for where am I going to re energize? Are there pockets of time that are dedicated to restoration, replenishment, battery recharging? If you are like me and you need some nature time, but you haven't been in a beautiful, quiet place with no agenda and not in a rush for, several weeks, and you won't be for another several weeks, I need you to take that seriously. And then I need you to take a deep breath and not listen to any of the voices in your head saying, that's not possible. We don't have time. We can't go there. We don't. And I need you to ask the question you want the answer to. How can we make it happen? What's the version that we can make happen? Okay, so you can't go to the dog beach in Santa Barbara, one of my happy places. So you can't get to there this week. Okay. Then we don't have to be unrealistic about it. What can you make happen? What will be restorative? Ask the questions you want the answers to so that your brain has something useful to do as opposed to just be a negative naysayer Nancy. If being alone re-energizes you and restores you, check for where that's gonna happen this week and be honest. Because if you're gonna get home and you're gonna technically be alone, but you're gonna be probably end up working a little bit or cleaning the house or taking care of a million other things that aren't on your work to-do list or on your life to-do list, is that gonna be restorative? We have to put protected time in the plan that's just for battery recharging. I know, wild, right? It's like if we wanna keep planning on using our human bodies and brains, it's like we have to plan on charging their batteries. Like, what are we, a phone that we just expect to, like, not work forever without ever plugging it in? Yeah, exactly like that. Okay, number 4, check for what you are assuming you have to do, and then I want you to check for what you're assuming has to get done in general. I'm separating these, I'm saying both points because people like us can take a lot of responsibility for things that are not our responsibility. So, we can know we technically don't have to do something, and we can put it right there at the top of our list anyway. So, I want you to just check. Is there anything you're assuming you have to do this week that's just like no one else can do it but you? You have to do it. That's the only option. This is easy to scan for when you look through what am I planning and you consider who else could do that? If the answer to literally everything on your calendar is no one, no one, no one, no one, you could be right. I'm not here to call you wrong. We're friends. But I want you to check for the assumption. Assumptions are always worth questioning because even if they're proven right, you get to make a deliberate choice and feel in charge of this point of view. We want you in charge of your perspective. If you absolutely have to do everything on your list this week, great. At least we know where we stand about it. And then I want you to also scan for, are you assuming something has to get done either this week or at all? Or that it has to get done in a certain way. There was an example of this in real life was I usually go to this one mechanic for my oil changes, and it works out when it works out, and it totally completely does not work out when it doesn't because he usually has to take my car for a big chunk of the day, and I really like him, and he's worked on my car for years, and he gives me a little discount for cash, so it's totally great when it works out. But when it doesn't conveniently fit into my schedule, I'll go weeks and weeks and weeks past when I'm supposed to get an oil change. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about where you're scanning for an assumption that something has to get done or has to get done in some certain way that maybe just, in a perfect world, maybe that would be the case, but this week, not going to happen. We're just checking for assumptions. Remember, overwhelm means your resources are overtaxed. So we have to find some places to be stingy with those resources. We got to let some stuff go. So that either means that you're not going to do some of the stuff that you planned on or thought you had to, or someone else told you you had to, or you're going to start getting a little flexible with how and potentially when those things get done. And a good trick for this is fast forwarding. I want you to just transport yourself to the end of the week. You're on the other side of the week. Just pretend. I want you to imagine, given that this was your plan, your schedule or your list or whatever you're looking at today, looking ahead at the week, when you mentally transport yourself to the other side of the week and it is now behind you, what did you not do? What did you have on your list that you're like, yeah, we don't have time for this? Or obviously, this is going to take 4 hours, not 1 hour. Or I don't want to do this right now. And I actually don't have to. We sometimes know the things that we're putting on the list, we're putting on the calendar that we know that's bonus points. That's unicorn day. That's probably not going to happen, but I'm going to write it down anyway. Listen to me very carefully. If you are experiencing overwhelm and you need to start notching away at that overwhelm right now, today, you have to start being more honest about your schedule and your to do. Because even if you're writing stuff down as like, probably won't do that, but I think I should. Or, oh my God, it would be so nice if this got done. If we're in overwhelm and our resources are overtaxed, and we're being honest about that, just having that stuff on the list or on the calendar is adding to your mental load. You cannot be carrying such a heavy mental load when you are trying to decrease your overwhelm. So I need you to get that stuff off the list, take it off the calendar. If you can already tell, I'm not going to do that this week. Let's just be honest. All right. Give it to somebody else, delegate it to future you, decide it doesn't have to happen, whatever you need to do. Okay, the fifth thing we're going to look at in your week is actually only going to be a useful tactic if this isn't temporary. So sometimes, you know what? Life just snowballs a little bit and everything happens all at once. We get some super blue new moon or something. All of the bills come at once. All of the surprises happen in the same 3 days. Sometimes this happens. If the overwhelm you're experiencing right now is temporary, and you can see it as an anomalous week that you just got to get through and then recover from. Fabulous. Use the tactics that we already went through to make it as energetically efficient a week as you can. And then make sure that you plan on recovering. Do not shoot yourself into a million other commitments and energy drainers right away. Make sure you have recovery time. If it's not temporary, if this feels like the way that you are just to be expected to live until something outside of you changes, then what I'm going to need you to do is check if there is space in your calendar to have a conversation with someone about this changing. Because here's what we know about overwhelm. If it is not temporary, if it is your given circumstance, and it will be indefinitely, we cannot wait for things to change on their own. I want you to imagine a river being formed. Water will flow wherever it is the easiest to flow. And the deeper grooves it builds, the harder it's going to be to move that river someday. It's possible, but we don't wanna wait until we have Niagara Falls to redirect. So if this overwhelm you're experiencing, this flavor of overwhelm is kind of just how life feels like it is right now in this season of life, then we wanna make sure that you, even in your busyness and your energy depletion, are putting time in the calendar to put a rock in the river. We gotta start putting one rock in at a time to redirect the flow of the water and make the larger changes that will be necessary, that high level change we talked about, so that this isn't the way that you have to live forever. The reason I say it's a conversation is because 9.9 times out of 10, this is not something that you change alone. It's either something you need to conscript your boss or your team in with you so that you can change the way that you work, or you have to have a conversation with your partner because we need to change the system of how we're dealing with something at home, or you have to have a conversation with a coach because you need an outside expert perspective who's going to help you ask the highest quality questions to make the most impactful change and not further overtax yourself. So, whoever the conversation is going to be with, it needs to be a conversation. It needs to not be you putting it on yourself to just get tougher and figure everything out by yourself. If that would have worked, it would have worked by now. So this is the final thing. And I almost hesitated to put it on the list because it's not something that will immediately decrease your overwhelm like the other tactics that we talked about. However, one of the hardest things about living in overwhelm is the undercurrent that you can feel that this is never going to change. Ask me how I know. And we want to alleviate that feeling. We want you to feel like you are advocating for yourself. So even if you have a busy, draining week, if you have four more that you can see on the horizon after that, we want you to feel like you are allowed to hope and trust that things will get better. and things will change. And the fastest, easiest way to create that is by just putting a rock in the river right now. Put a conversation on the calendar right now. And it doesn't have to be the only end all be all, okay, this fixes everything conversation. It can be an exploratory conversation. It can just be, I need to talk about the fact that I need help or I need something to change. And you can go from there. So, if it is temporary and the overwhelm is not something you are living with indefinitely, I am so happy for you. Make sure that you have that recovery time on your calendar as well. So you don't just expect yourself to go from, oh man, I made it through that crazy week. I would love to sleep for 7 days to, oh my gosh, I have a 16-hour day on Monday. How awesome. Thanks, past me. Shaking my head. Okay. I hope these tactics help you look really practically at your week ahead and look for holes that you can fill in, things you can strategically move, actions you can practically take that will make a big difference. I feel like life is too short for you to be living in overwhelm. You are too vivacious and special to be feeling like you're treading water and operating on fumes. And it's a hard way to live, and I know that sometimes we just go through that time of life. We go through these seasons, we go through pockets of it, but my goal is to help you feel more equipped to not have overwhelm so often, certainly not live at overwhelm as your baseline. So if I can help, you know I'm gonna. And if you want my direct help, it's time to reach out and schedule a consult. I do this with clients a lot where we actually look at their week and I've had people show me their calendars and it's really helpful to get this outside eye asking questions about, okay, when are you going to take a break or when are you going to recharge? That sounds like an emotionally taxing conversation. What are your expectations of yourself the rest of the day? It doesn't always have to be that granular, but sometimes that's what we need. So, if you're looking for this kind of support that can balance the day to day kind of ground level tactics to help you feel better and be more in alignment with what matters to you right now, and the high level view of what can we change overall, operationally, systematically, that's where I can come in. So, book your consult and we'll just talk about if it makes sense to work together. And it's free and it's really fun and it's super useful. So I can't wait to see you there. KirstenParker.com/schedule. And I'll see you next week on another podcast episode. Hey, want to find out your decision style? Obviously, go take the decision style quiz. It's in the show notes and at KirstenParker.com/quiz. We all have our style when it comes to making decisions, but do you know how to use your default way of thinking to your advantage? Or do you mainly get stuck in the most annoying parts of overthinking and people pleasing? The decision style quiz has your answers, my friend. Take it right now at KirstenParker.com/quiz.